Um, Currently, Mark is on PTO and he would not be able to attend today's meeting. So we will start without him and we'll share a recording of this meeting afterwards. So let us share as usual to highlight update we've done during this week on MSI track. So let me share my screen.
Hello.
So during this week, the main goal for us was to process the main pull request. We mark all of the pull requests with the top 10 label, and currently we have 5 pull requests, but most of them are almost ready to be merged. So we are just waiting for builds. We have slight issue with the last one, but I believe we will manage with Valerie to resolve this issue during the weekend and merge all the pull requests. And the main reason why we wanted to process knowledge of this main pull request, because we consider that these pull requests are blocking the regression cycle. So as we told the week ago, after we will merge all of the pull requests, we will consider that the first pre-alpha version of the MSI is ready. And after that, we will start the regression testing on the MSI track. So actually, that's why we expect that regression testing will be started from Tuesday of the next week. Also, on the current week, we were finalizing our modularity track. That was the one which Anton Krill, as the main architect of Magento, was the most interested about, and we'll have a dedicated meeting with Anton regarding that. But looks like finalizing all of the dependency. I already now I'm working on digitalizing one because currently I have just a paper version. But currently, the list of all the external dependency from MSI to Magento modules looks like this. Ideally, it would be not to have this dependency, EV and import export, and to have them as a soft dependencies. But currently, because we need to integrate into legacy functionality of the import export, this dependency looks for us as mandatory, and this dependency looks we can't avoid them. So actually, the main idea and the main task was, which Anton Krill was passionate about, whether it's possible to deploy MSI with the shortest possible instance of Magento on a dedicated server, when it would be such a possibility, and they have just a valid dependencies on Magento. So currently, we see that we have dependency on catalog, on sales, on catalog inventory, so the legacy version of inventory, and I believe in future, because it's a legacy version, and since 2.4 version, we will just dismantle and remove this module, so this dependency also would be eliminated. We have dependency on store module, because store provides the possibility to work with a website, and we currently, in Magento currently, website is the sales channel we are using to resolve the stock. And actually all the product types configurable, grouped and bundled, because we have our own processing of that product functionality. And actually that's all. So this is how MSI could be deployed if it's used as a headless version, if it's used in a headless way. If a merchant would like to use our UI as well, he should add also next dependency to UI, backend, report, directory, and shipping. So taking into account that we make segregation between UI modules and modules with a business logic and API interface, we have the switchable part of UI, because we consider that, especially in case of the multi-source inventory, UI part would be a subject of switching off, the subject of enabling and disabling, because most of the system integrators actually don't use the UI of the multi-sourcing in Magento, because they already provided the UI in an external ERP system. For example, MCOM, so Magento Commerce also provides own version of UI for multi-sourcing. That's why making the integration with the MCOM, we will switch altogether all the existing UI of the MSI, and actually all the dependencies will gone. We are almost ready. So we have last two pull requests regarding the modularity created, and now we are waiting for the green builds, and we actually expecting the green build so we can close the modularity track, and we are ready from the modularity perspective to finish it before the alpha version of MSI. So here is the update. Also, we have we have a pretty big queue of pull requests. For example, during this week, Bartek created more than 20 pull requests to accommodate PHP 7.1 syntax into the MSI code base, but this pull request would be postponed till the regression, until we will proceed the regression, and till we will merge the till we will release the beta version of MSI in the mid of June. And after that, we will start to merge this pull request, which is introduced, which is definitely introduce a value to the project. But currently, we don't want to risk with the terms of regression started and the terms when we release the beta version of MSI. That's also we had. Oh, I see Anton Krill on the meeting. So maybe I need just to show one more time the valid modulus, headless way and non-headless.
No need to show.
Okay. So now let me check whether Ricardo is on the meeting. Yeah, I see that Ricardo is on the call. So Ricardo wants to show you and to present you a really good feature request, and actually it's on the alpha version as the MSI in general. Oh, Max, nice glasses. Hi. So Ricardo will show you how we propose to make all the data interface immutable and remove the setter method. So the particular implementation plan is not yet finalized, but actually it was a proof of concept, and Ricardo will just share his results now. So, Ricardo.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So I think it's less than one proof of concept, actually. It's more similar to one idea. So I can show you my screen so we can see some piece of code. Wait a minute. Okay. Can you see?
Yes.
Can you see my screen? Okay. So basically the initial idea was to to remove the setters from the interface to allow the API to work without the setter methods. So to allow the API to directly inject inside the constructor parameters, so we can create that kind of immutable DTO. And my first approach was modifying the service input processor. That basically is the main entry point of the web API when handling the parameters. And I modified by creating this get constructor data that is basically going to unpack the information from the request and inject inside the constructor. So basically, I get out of this method so the parameters to inject to this new constructor that can directly receive the information. So, for example, if you want to inject a data like the customer name, we do not need to do set customer name, but we just need to inject the customer name variable inside the constructor, and then we create a get method. But the problem was with the backward compatibility. So because most of the models are inheriting from abstract model that basically is using the data variable to be populated. So I also decided to modify the constructor data method by adding a check. So if a data parameter is set, we also inject the same information inside the data parameter. And this was my first approach, and is simply working. But the problem is that in this way we just modify the interface, but the underlying model. So, for example, if we take an example in the MSI, so we take the source model, the source object. Here we can, for example, remove all the setters from the interface, like I did here. But the underlying model still has the set methods because you need it for example, to use in the backend when you try to save, because as far as now, it is using, the MSI is using an iterator that basically rely on populate with array that relies on setter methods. So what I decided is to try to move this logic from the API to even the Magento model. So I tried to create some kind of DTO for the framework itself. So we do not use the Immutable DTO only for the interface, but we also use in the code. But if we do this, we have to change a lot of things because, for example, you cannot change the information in an Immutable DTO anymore. So because simply because it's just immutable. So I decided to migrate one kind of logic I found when I was working with React.js, because for example, React.js is using the immutables, and whenever you need to change something inside the immutable, you just create a new object with a new information. That makes sense. They call it mapping. And basically, I decided to change the source iterator approach in the source mapper approach, that basically is creating a copy of the object with updated information. So if we want to save the new source, instead of iterating, I create a copy of the same source based on the previous one. So we create a new immutable source, and we can save it. With this approach, we can remove all the setters from the model. In fact, in my example, I just remove all the setters, but we still have a problem that basically the abstract extensible model, that is the abstract class of our source, is using the data variable again. So the getters are still based on the data, but they are working. It's still, it's always immutable, so it seems to be working. But we still have another problem, that is the set extension attributes, because I think we cannot remove this kind of setter, because many, when we want to use extension attributes, we are relying on plugins, and many users are using set extension attributes to inject the new extension attributes. So I think this will be the only one we cannot remove, but I don't know what you think about. But anyway, this is what I did till now, and it seems to be working. So as you can see, the source model has no more setters, and it seems to be working. So it's just a proof of concept, as you were saying, but I think it's a good starting point. And that's it. I don't know if you have any question.
I have one comment. So, as you probably know, early days of Magento 2 service contracts, the concept of immutable data objects was used. So all objects are immutable by default in the beginning. Then So it's a bit of historical context. And then after working with immutable objects for a while, the decision was made to switch to mutable objects because it was inconvenient to work with immutable objects. We didn't have good infrastructure to work with immutable objects. And at that point, we still have builders, but builders were used for immutable objects. So if you wanted to create new object, you would create a builder for that object, populate that builder with data from old object, add new data, and then build new object.
This is what exactly when I told you before. I moved from a source separator to a source mapper that basically create an immutable data object helper that is doing exactly this. Because if you look inside, it's just an easier way to do this. Because what I do is create a new object and inject new information inside this new object. So it's a kind of builder actually.
Yes, I agree, and my only comment was it would be good to rename source mapper to source builder to keep consistency. Plus, mapper has a bit different semantics because mapper maps from one state to other state, and here you're merging two states into a new state. So that's one thing. Other thing. Did you think about auto-generation of this?
Yes, well, actually we have a side project. I was talking about this with Igor, but it's still less than one alpha with Alessandro, that basically we are working on this kind of stuff. So it's a kind of auto-generator for DTO and all the stuff connected, but it's a side project. So I can show it to you, but not now. But yes, we have been thinking to some kind of auto generation.
Okay, so it's conceptually I like immutable data objects. The only problem we have to solve now that we didn't have a good solution 2 or 3 years ago was how to work with nested immutable objects. Like if you have a lot of nesting, like 3 levels of nesting, so you have a data object for product. The product has a link to option has a link to value, and if you want to change value, then you have to go and change create 3 new objects. That was the scenario that I think killed the idea of immutable data objects in Magento. So I think that there is a way to solve it in a convenient way for developer. It's a good direction. Let's try to solve it from second try.
Okay. Okay, now anyway, I'm done. So.
Yeah, and just want to add that we don't want to forbid and mutability at all, but the main idea is to provide the possibility to use immutability, because currently, because of the limitation of the web API framework, etc., there is no possibility to do it. So we would like to make a proof of concept and see that we have a possibility to create with immutable data interfaces. So because we expect that we would not have so much of nested level in DPOs of multi-source inventory, for example, comparing with catalog data where there is object, category, and all the nested comes from this entity.
Yeah, well, as far as now, I think you can just choose what is the best approach for you. I mean, this kind of approach can be just an alternative to the original one, I think. So I think it must not replace completely.
Yeah. That's actually exactly what I told. That's alternative, not a replacement for the mutability.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Ricardo, for your update. That's very inspiring. And the next one gonna be John, who will show the update on MFTF framework. and the metadata changes he brought to the MFTF framework, and he promised a week ago to make us performance boost on the acceptance test. So John, feel free to share your screen and steal the show.
Awesome. So yeah, I'll take over now. Let me share my screen here. Can everyone see me or see the screen? Cool. Let's see. So this week I've been working on my PR, trying to improve the actual execution speed of all of the 10 tests that I have in this particular one. So I will jump over to some actual code. So beforehand, these are some tests I mocked up to show you what I've been working on. So beforehand, we had to actually go through and do all of these actions here. So we actually had to go to the stock page. We had to open up an actual stock. We had to assign the actual website to it, then assign the source to it. And all of this took around about 35, 40 seconds. So and that was needed to be done in most of our tests. So the first step that I did was I wrapped this all up into a nice little action group. So in my PR, I also introduced action groups. I have several different action groups that we have implemented here. So this was the first version that I did. I just made this a bit cleaner and easier to use. So that didn't speed up anything. It just made the code a bit easier to write. Then I actually dove in and started creating metadata for this. So metadata just allows us to post everything via the API. This took a little bit to actually set up, and with help from my team, we got it all created. So now we can actually create stocks via the API. We can then create a source via the API, and we can create a stock via the API, and then we can actually link these two together. All of this takes a few seconds. So we go from 35, 40 seconds down to probably less than 5 seconds to actually create everything via the API. And this cleans up our code. So we go from this messy block in most of our tests to just these few lines here. And that gives us an improvement in our actual execution speed. So I noticed I probably cut off a good 3-4 minutes off of my test when I actually introduced this metadata into it, which was really exciting because we got rid of a lot of code. We did everything via the API, just a lot faster, a lot better. So that is what we actually introduced with this PR. The PR itself lists the tests that we've created, all of the different pieces of metadata that we touched and created have been listed here. So if anyone likes to look over them to see how they were actually set up. And then I have a list of all the action groups that I introduced here. They may still be useful in some tests, so we kept them in place. But most of the things I've done have been wrapped up into metadata, which has been really exciting. And another update I'd like to share is we are getting a lot of tests coming in, which is super exciting. Right now we have 32 tests pending in the PRs that we have open that Alex is working very hard to get reviewed. And I jump in and help him do some reviewing today. And we currently have 26 tests that are labeled as automated that are committed to the actual repo. So if you pull it down, you should have about 26 tests that will actually run. Yeah, so that's what I was working on this week. Kind of brief, just dive into that. Yeah, kind of what I did this week.
Cool. Thank you, John. The next one, I will show you update from Alex Litvinov. He's unfortunately not on the call, but he made a screen recording and we will present the screen recording he made and he prepared for today's demo. The main idea of the feature he made, it was brought like a week or 2 weeks ago when we were documenting the possibility of disabling sources. And it was a possibility in MSI to disable the default source, but taking into, and it could be possible to create a single source system based on another source, but not default one. And actually, this sounds like a good possibility, good opportunity, but taking into account that we have a lot of special logic assigned to default source. We decided that for the MVP version that it would be okay to prevent the possibility of disabling default source. And so in the MVP version, we will always have the default source as enable one. And we created additional story for future version to consider a possibility of disabling default source. But currently, because we have too many logic, like migration from the single stock system to MSI one, we use the default source. We use the default source for synchronization. And just to remind you that we support bundle and group product for default source, default stock only, and we reuse the existing index. So catalog inventory stock status. That's why currently we are unable to provide the possibility for default sourcing to be disabled. So now I will share my screen and show that Alex Litvinov introduced this kind of functionality, and now we prevent default source to be disabled.
I wanted to show you I've been working on the bug prevent disabling of default source. So here you go. We need to go to manage sources. The bug is when we are disabling default source. We can do that right now. So that's the bug, because we cannot disable default source. So here we go. And when we click on is enabled, yes, we get default source cannot be disabled. So I'm successfully done this job, and I've been working on some tests. So I want to show you how my tests run on the with REST adapter. We need some time to enable the configuration, and test is running. And yes, everything is successful. Time 43 seconds, and test was successfully. Thank you all, guys.
Thank you, Alex. So we already communicated to Alex and asked him just to disable the toggle for the default source, just to prevent to be enabled. So what's the matter to have it to be enabled, and if the functionality doesn't work with the default source, and he will make this slight change soon. But he made a reporting before our conversation. So this actually is the main update for this week. We are finishing our preparation for regression, which is supposed to start from the next week, and I believe we will manage to merge the existing requests during the weekend. Maybe there are some open question, maybe from Anton, as he's substituting Mark on today's meeting.
I didn't agree to that, but I think the change with no questions. I think that the scenario of switching from single source to multi-source is important. We have to pay attention to this, and it's good that we are improving it.
We are working on this functionality with Felix Delival, and I almost convinced him to make a demo on the upcoming MSI on the upcoming MSI weekly demo.
Okay, good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you guys for visiting us, and see you in a week. And of course, don't wait the whole week. Just ping us anytime you want in a Slack channel. We are always responsive. Thank you. Bye.